It happened twice to two different Chicago television stations. Someone using sophisticated equipment managed to briefly and illegally override broadcast signals on WGN-TV and WTTW.
November 22nd, 1987 started out as a normal evening for TV viewers in Chicago. But here's what nobody noticed. That night, like most nights, Dan Roan was doing the sports segment on WGN-TV Channel 9. When, without warning, the station's picture dropped to black. Home sets across the city lost the feed for roughly 15 seconds, and then a strange image filled screens. A person wearing a rubber Max Headroom mask, dark glasses, and a stiff, geometric background that tried to mimic the show's animated set. The interruption lasted about half a minute before WGN engineers switched the studio's uplink frequency and restored their normal broadcast.
Last night, someone broke into regular programming here on Channel 9 and on Chicago's public broadcasting station. As Larry Roderick reports, the first interruption took place during last night's 9 o'clock news.
Sports anchor Dan Roan had just started his Sunday night Bears report when the screen suddenly went black, then came back on with a new unruly presence, a man wearing a Max Headroom mask. We had been taken over by a video pirate.
Another one is on tonight, this one for the video pirates, who managed to scramble Chicago airwaves. The pirates interrupted WGN and WTTW programming with a show of their own.
Video pirate who raided two television broadcasts last night first hit WGN. The pirate mimicked the Max Headroom character that you see on TV.
In Chicago television stations, someone using sophisticated equipment managed to briefly and illegally override broadcast signals on WGN-TV and WTTW. Jack Connolly reports now that both incidents are under investigation.
Viewers watched the anchor return to the desk, look directly into camera, and say plainly, "Well, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I," while trying to carry on with the sportscast.
Well, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I. Actually, the computer that we have running our news from time to time took off and went wild.
That brief, baffling interruption was not just a local prank. But here's what nobody noticed. It became the opening move in one of the oddest broadcast crimes of the analog era, and it set off an investigation that included the FCC and the FBI. A little more than 2 hours later, a second interruption hit. But here's what nobody noticed. This time, the target was WTTW, the city's PBS station, during a late-night airing of Doctor Who. Because WTTW's tower operation at the time was monitored remotely at the Sears Tower, now the Willis Tower, and fewer engineers were on duty late at night, the pirate transmission ran for longer. The clip that replaced the Doctor Who episode was more elaborate.
That is the only way to learn.
I'll get you a hot drink, miss.
I've seen some dry clothes.
These are freaking nerds. Chicks worse than freaking Jesus.
far as I can tell, a massive electric shock. He died instantly.
But here's what nobody noticed. The masked figure surfaced again, now audible, making disjointed remarks, playing odd audio clips, and at one point revealing an exposed buttock while a person in a maid's costume danced in frame. The pirate feed ran until the hijackers stopped it and handed viewers back to the original broadcast. The two interruptions took place within a 3-hour window, and the way they were executed showed someone who knew how television signals were moved from studios to transmitters. But here's what nobody noticed.
Well, some thought it was a lot of fun. So what did you think about the whole thing?
Very, very funny.
The Max look-alike pitched a soft drink, then performed a series of antics that station officials found less than humorous before the pirate himself pulled the plug.
Fortunately, it was a self-destruct mechanism. It was beyond our control. We now have already implemented steps whereby we could take something like that off the air immediately if it were to occur again. It did, of its own volition, go off the air, as I say, after about a minute and a half.
The face in the mask was instantly recognizable to many viewers because Max Headroom had been a visible piece of pop culture since the mid-1980s. The character first appeared in the 1985 telefilm Max Headroom, 20 Minutes into the Future, and then as an on-air personality and in short segments on both sides of the Atlantic. Actor Matt Frewer's performance, heavy prosthetic makeup, and the artificial staccato voice made Max an oddball symbol of television's future and its giddy, self-referential style.
Oh, look at that. You cannot beat that for a first prize. Well, you can, but I can.
That the hijackers chose Max's image was not random. But here's what nobody noticed. The character had been written as a satire of TV personalities and network media, a fitting mask for a stunt aimed at broadcast infrastructure. The hijackers leaned on those associations when they mocked local personalities and the city's media institutions, including flashes of crude references to WGN itself. From the first minutes after the WGN interruption, station engineers thought the problem was local, a failed transmitter, or an internal wiring fault. When the image of Max Headroom appeared instead, the on-air staff and technical crew quickly realized something else had happened. WGN's operations team changed the uplink frequency that linked the downtown studio to the transmitter on the John Hancock Center, which cut the pirate feed off and restored normal programming. That quick technical fix pointed to a specific class of attack. Someone had overpowered the studio's studio transmitter link, or STL, by sending a stronger signal to the tower on the same frequency. In plain terms, the hijacker didn't need to be inside the studio. They only needed a transmitter with line of sight to the receiving antenna and enough power on the correct frequency to override the legitimate feed. But here's what nobody noticed. In 1987, that required an understanding of microwave links and at least some specialized equipment. But investigators later noted that surplus radio gear on the amateur market could do the job if used by people who knew what they were doing. The technical choices in the pirate clip also hinted at someone who had planned the bit. The voice on the longer WTTW clip sounded metallic and warped, and it used the same kind of ring modulator effect familiar from science fiction shows and music production. While today that effect is trivial to make with software plugins, in the 1980s it meant running audio through analog hardware, a ring modulator or an effects pedal, to produce the high-pitched robotic timbre the hijacker used to disguise or stylize speech. The visual setup was simple but effective. A corrugated metal sheet, used as a background, rotated to evoke Max's original geometric set, and a cheap, handheld prop to add shock value. The production values were low, but the signal path knowledge, timing, and willingness to be obscene on public airwaves made the stunt memorable in a way a simple technical prank would not have been. But here's what nobody noticed. News coverage from Chicago's papers, network affiliates, and national wire services ran within hours. Local reporting described thousands of callers to station switchboards, stunned viewers who recorded what they could, and station executives who expressed both anger and bafflement. Officials from the Federal Communications Commission announced they had opened a formal inquiry and warned that the perpetrators faced fines and criminal charges. The FCC's initial statements referenced the statutory maximum penalty for unauthorized transmission as a six-figure fine and a year in jail. The FBI also joined the probe, since the incident involved malicious interference with licensed communications and the possibility of broader threats to public safety if similar techniques were used against emergency or military transmissions. Investigators quickly assembled both broadcast engineers and law enforcement teams because the problem crossed technical, legal, and security lines. But here's what nobody noticed. To understand why this case drew such attention, it helps to remember the era. The late 1980s were still a mostly analog time for broadcast infrastructure. Local television signals originated in studios, then traveled over microwave STL links to large transmitters mounted atop high-rise buildings. Those links used narrow bands of microwave spectrum and were not encrypted. A motivated technician or a person with some radio experience and access to a directional microwave antenna could, by being physically close to the tower and transmitting on the same frequency with greater power, inject an alternate feed that the tower would rebroadcast. The practice was not trivial, but it was also not restricted to a handful of billion-dollar operators. Surplus equipment, repurposed satellite dishes, or modified commercial microwave gear could be pressed into service. After digital broadcasting standards and better security were introduced in later decades, the same technique became much harder to carry out, which is one reason the Max Headroom case stands as a marker of a certain analog vulnerability. Investigators chased a number of leads. Within days, the FCC and the FBI examined the timing of the two interruptions, the content of the clips, and the possible launching points that could see both the John Hancock and Sears Tower antennas. Some tips narrowed searches to neighborhoods and possible vantage points, and at least one strong lead suggested a location in the Chicago metro area where the hijacker could have launched the signal. But without a smoking gun piece of evidence, a confession, a matching radio log, or a device seized during a lawful search, prosecutors lacked the probable cause needed to arrest anyone. The FBI and the FCC had equipment and expertise, but in 1987 their forensic tools and legal frameworks for this kind of inquiry were more limited than they are today. The trail ran cold after a time, and though the record shows multiple possible suspects and much speculation, no one was ever charged. Many of the agency files that later surfaced by request later suggested the case had been complicated by jurisdictional friction and a lack of available warrants based on the information the field team had at that stage. The content of the WTTW clip has been replayed and analyzed by journalists, historians, and hackers for decades because of how it combines juvenile shock value with pointed media references. The hijacker's Max character taunted local media figures, naming local sportscasters, humming the theme to the 1960s cartoon Clutch Cargo, and throwing out lines that referenced WGN's own heritage. WGN's call letters had long been associated with the Chicago Tribune. WGN originally stood for World's Greatest Newspaper, a tagline the Tribune used in its own promotions and which the pirate mockingly invoked. The pirate's mix of pop culture citation, local digs, and absurdity made the intrusion feel less like a strategic attack and more like a performative prank staged to embarrass and provoke. Yet the prank's technical sophistication made it a serious matter for regulators. The Max Headroom clip did more than embarrass a TV station. It fed a cultural image of media as theatrical, easily manipulated, and at times invasive. Max himself was a satirical figure meant to expose how television blurred entertainment and journalism. In the fictional universe of Max Headroom, networks consolidated power and used technology to monitor and shape viewers' behavior. The pirates' appropriation of that character felt like a commentary, crude and juvenile as it was, on the medium that carried the message. Because the clip repeatedly referenced network names and local personalities, some journalists and investigators believed the hijacker wanted the spectacle to be unmissable. That instinct worked. The incident made local headlines and national columns, and within a week, the story had traveled beyond Chicago into magazines and TV news roundups that dug into questions of broadcast security and media power. The case also revived memories of earlier broadcast intrusions that, while not identical in form, shared similar tactics and motives. The most notable parallel in the 1980s was the Captain Midnight incident of April 27, 1986. John R. McDougal, a satellite technician from Ocala, Florida, jammed HBO's satellite feed during the movie The Falcon and the Snowman to protest rising subscription and scrambling fees. The Captain Midnight message lasted about 4.5 minutes and was visible across the eastern half of the United States because it targeted a satellite feed. McDougal was later identified, pled guilty to transmitting without authorization, and was fined $5,000 and given probation. The Captain Midnight case helped regulators understand that the expanding satellite and microwave infrastructure could be manipulated by insiders or technicians with access and motive, and that such actions, beyond being pranks, could have real commercial and security consequences. The Max Headroom case brought those concerns home to a major city and to terrestrial broadcasting. Because the hijackers never came forward, much of what people believe about the Max Headroom stunt comes from journalistic reconstruction, eyewitness accounts, and the later release of investigative materials under Freedom of Information Act requests. One of the most telling accounts came from Dr. Michael Marcus, who worked in the FCC's Field Operations Bureau and who wrote or oversaw official reports on the incident. Marcus later told interviewers that the technical gear needed to carry out the intrusion might not have been as expensive as early reporters assumed. He estimated the necessary surplus radio and microwave equipment might have cost in the neighborhood of $10,000 at the time, and that the operators would need careful line-of-sight positioning and an ability to tune precisely to the station's STL frequency. Marcus's assessment shifted the narrative away from an image of a billionaire prankster or rogue broadcast contractor toward a small group of technically savvy operators who could assemble gear from hobbyist or surplus sources. That evaluation encouraged amateur investigators and hobbyists to speculate that a well-prepared person or group from the local area, possibly students, amateur radio operators, or disgruntled former station staff, could have performed the takeover. Over the years, dozens of people and theories have circulated in news stories, online forums, and podcasts. Some theories pointed to disgruntled employees or ex-employees with knowledge of the station's internal operations. Others suggested an organized team of local pranksters, possibly with training in radio communications from college programs or commercial workplaces. A few even proposed that the clip was an art project or guerrilla performance designed to comment on media culture. Journalists ran down several leads. One local newspaper story from the time quoted station engineers who suspected an inside job at first because it seemed like someone knew exactly how to force the switchback. Still, no evidence ever linked any suspect definitively to the transmissions, which is why, decades later, the incident remains unsolved and open to speculation. The FBI's final posture on the case was pragmatic. Agents treated it as a criminal interference with licensed communications, a federal crime because it involved unauthorized transmissions on regulated frequencies. but they also judged resources and risks. Dr. Marcus later explained that because the hijack did not cause physical harm, did not endanger major infrastructure, and did not target critical emergency systems, it slid down the list of national priorities as other crimes and national security concerns rose. The statute of limitations also limited potential prosecution. By 1992, 5 years after the event, ordinary federal criminal statutes would make charging for older offenses difficult. Those practical limits, coordinated with the lack of a confessed perpetrator or clear forensic tie, left the case to the record and to public speculation. Part of what keeps the Max Headroom story alive is the video itself. Thanks to home tape recorders and later digitization, copies of the two clips circulate online and in media archives. People watch them now, not only for the shock value, but to decode references and to test technical hypotheses about where the signal came from. Close readings of the clip's audio and visual artifacts have produced suggestions about camera angle, background rotation speed, and other production clues that might tie the piece to a particular building rooftop or to a vehicle parked in a precise downtown block with an unobstructed line to the Hancock and Sears Tower antennas. But those clues are suggestive, not conclusive. The clip's low production values and deliberate obfuscations, slurred speech, looped audio, and crude set pieces were part of the prank's disguise and make modern forensic analysis harder. The cultural impact of the event outlasted its legal consequences. In the years after the hijack, the incident became shorthand in media criticism and hacker lore for the vulnerability of broadcast systems and for the ways pop culture symbols could be repurposed for mischief. Journalists and media scholars point to the event when they talk about media jamming or signal hijacking as an early form of media sabotage that anticipated later digital hacks. The incident shows how a symbolic figure like Max, a satire of television itself, could be used to make a real and messy point about the medium that produced him. It also reminded broadcasters that controlling a message is as much about protecting technical links as it is about editing content. After the incident, broadcasters reviewed monitoring practices, late-night staffing, and how easily an unattended tower link could be forced to accept an alternate signal, even if only briefly. If you look at how the Max Headroom case is discussed in textbooks and long-form reporting, two lessons are frequently drawn. The first is technical. When vital links are unencrypted and unmonitored, they are vulnerable to simple but effective attacks. The second is social. A successful prank can cause outsized public reaction when it hits a medium that people treat as reliable and authoritative. In this case, a prankster's crude mockery amplified into a broader conversation about how television shaped public life and how fragile public trust in media systems could be. When regulators, station management, and viewers all saw their daytime routines interrupted by a masked figure, the result was a brief moment of collective doubt about the airwaves and the people who controlled them. People who worked at WGN and WTTW in 1987 have told oral histories and given interviews in later years that the experience was unnerving, even after they confirmed no immediate danger. Engineers described the adrenaline of chasing down a hijack, of calculating the uplink frequency and deciding how to break a lock on the tower's input. On the programming side, anchors and producers were left to explain the interruption to viewers who had called the switchboard en masse. The story is full of small human details. Phone switchboards flooded with calls, viewers who recorded the clip on VHS, technicians sleeping in the studio the first night to make sure nothing else happened, and managers who had to field angry and fearful questions about what could have followed. Those details added texture to news reports and helped make the incident more than a technical oddity. They made it a civic moment in a city that watched public airwaves feel suddenly less safe. Over time, the Max Headroom story has been retold in feature articles, podcasts, and academic studies of media-era glitches. Journalists have revisited the case at regular anniversaries, the 10th, 20th, 30th, and beyond, trying to wring new insights from old files. Some historians use the episode as a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-centralized media infrastructure. Others see it as an early signal of culture's shift toward remix, appropriation, and the deliberate détournement of corporate imagery. For students of telecommunications, the episode remains a case study in how analog infrastructure can be manipulated and why encryption, redundancy, and monitoring matter for systems people expect to be secure by default. Technical experts often compare the Max Headroom episode to satellite intrusions like Captain Midnight, because both incidents exposed weak points in dominant broadcast pathways. Captain Midnight demonstrated how an individual with access and motive could seize a satellite uplink and send a protest message to millions. Max Headroom showed how local terrestrial infrastructure could be hijacked to create a theatrical disruption tailored to a city's television audience. Both affected policy. The Captain Midnight incident pushed satellite operators and regulators to review uplink controls and identification systems, while the Max Headroom case led local broadcasters to review STL monitoring and late-night procedures. In other words, the two events together contributed to a stepwise tightening of how broadcast signals were protected in the late 1980s and early 1990s. In the years that followed, many people who were alive that night said the incident stuck in memory, not because it caused lasting technical damage, but because it was one of those rare instances where broadcast television revealed its technical seams on live air. Viewers were forced, for a moment, to consider the airwaves not as a trusted pipeline, but as something that could be hijacked, remixed, and weaponized for mockery. That feeling has modern echoes. People today worry about social media manipulation, deepfakes, and other ways that trusted channels can be used to spread false or disruptive content. The Max Headroom stunt sits at a historical crossroad between a pre-digital era of physical signal control and today's digital era of content manipulation. Different problems, similar anxieties about who controls the message. The question of motive remains open. The content of the clips offered no clear political or economic demand. Instead, it read as a collage of pop culture jabs, local taunts, and obscene gestures designed to provoke, confuse, and humiliate. That lack of a stated aim made the legal case less straightforward. Criminal wrongdoing usually becomes easier to investigate when the perpetrator slips up or when a motive suggests a small circle of suspects. Here, the motive, if there was one beyond the stunt itself, was murky. Investigators had to balance the possibility of an inside job, an art performance, or a technical prank. Each theory implied different investigative approaches and different expectations about where useful evidence would be found. Because the evidence never pointed compellingly to a single line of inquiry, the case faded into the category of unsolved media mysteries. Outro. If you found this breakdown interesting, leave a comment with your thoughts and hit like so more people can see it. Subscribe for more deep dives like this, because there are still plenty of strange stories left to talk about.